Okay, hello. This is a video for public consumption. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present the mini greedometer and greedometer sequence and apply it to the famous crash of 2007 to 2009. I'm going to start first with the greedometer sequence. By that, I mean it's a time series or a sequence of weekly values from the greedometer algorithm. On the website there, you'll see all of the input parameters to the greedometer algorithm, and there they are there. In fact, on the website there's an interactive tool where the top four of these slide and you see real time the impact to the greedometer gauge. So we find that enjoyable. Real quick, here's how you use the greedometer algorithm. You use a sequence of its readings, so that in and of itself is a very worthwhile point. A static or snapshot value or reading in a greedometer is not completely useful. To be fair, you need to see a value up pretty much through what I call 6,500 RPM or 6,500 to get your attention, and you need to basically chart the weekly readings in the greedometer sequence to really get the full value from it. Here's how you use it. Right. So in July of 2007, the stock market was hitting a new all-time high, just marginally past where it was the 2000 peak. 7 years to come back, but anyway, so we're at July of 07. We're at 15 something, 1500 something, 1550, something like that, on the SPIX, the S&P 500. You see about a 10%-ish or so drop and what I call a sucker rally right back to retest that peak. This peak was about 1.5-ish% on a weekly close basis, about 1.5% higher than that one. So ostensibly the same thing, right? So October, 1.5-ish%, the same thing as that. However, what happened in the greedometer values is while you drop from elevated readings, but from this point in time, around here in the greedometer, you see a substantial drop. It's about a 2,000 point drop on the greedometer, and a rally back to a decidedly lower value on the greedometer versus here. So when the SPIX is ostensibly the same here and here, you have a way lower reading here versus here, and that is how you use the greedometer to know that this is a crash launch point. And that is mostly all you can get out of this system. It's slow moving, so you really can't use it for market timing. You could use it for portfolio construction to a certain extent, but it is very slow moving. Even this point here is these are a few weeks after this point, so 3 or 4 weeks later. So it's not useful for market timing, but it is useful for painting a macroeconomic backdrop and for identifying when you're approaching a stock market crash launch point. Decidedly more valuable is the mini greedometer sequence. So the mini greedometer value is semi-tactical or tactical. It's you can see this is much more jagged. This is a faster moving algorithm. So on this chart, this is the S&P 500 in blue, weekly close basis. Again, 2007 2009, that crash. And in red, weekly mini greedometer value readings, or mini greedometer sequence. So faster moving, more jagged, and here's how you use it. You have to wait until you've got a birth point, and it's probably beyond the scope of this video to explain how I know what a birth point is. But anyway, at this point in time, I've seen many of them, and we can identify a birth point via another algorithm. So you get a birth point, you get a first baseline point, and you get a first top line point. The first top line point is also known as the crash launch point. What that does is if you connect the dots on the two baseline points, you can extend it, and that is what I call in nomenclature, that's called a mini greedometer baseline. And this is the top line. The top line, when you have the slope of the baseline, because of the dynamics or the mechanics of mini greedometer, you can estimate. And certainly if you have the baseline and you've got the first top line point, you can estimate what that top line slope will be. Again, beyond the scope of this video. But anyway, how you use this is fairly obvious, right? There's a mini greedometer baseline points coincide with major inversions where the SPIX stops dropping and then starts climbing. Okay, so you'll see that this aligns here, right? You'll see that this aligns here, Again, this aligns here, okay, and this aligns here. I'll get to that, don't worry. And same thing with the tops. These tops basically align. There's a top line, yep, same thing here, and more or less the same thing here. All right, so this is telling you major inversion points when they're happening. So that's how you use this system. You use this system to know when the stock market crash is going to initiate, when it is initiating, when you are in it, and when you are at or experiencing a major inflection point, such as here, 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 etc. Now, this is a dynamic system. Okay, price, the S&P 500 is not an input parameter in the same fashion that in the Greedometer algorithm, these are the input parameters. And you know what? Price is not an input parameter to the Greedometer sequence. Okay. Similarly, it is not an input parameter to the mini Greedometer algorithm. So you're using this system to time the stock market, and it shouldn't be lost on you that once you realize, once it's provable, once it is known that you're in a stock market crash, that you should be doing other things to your portfolio. You should be expecting things like yield curves to be flattening. You should be expecting things like credit spreads to blow out, okay? LIBOR minus OIS, all sorts of other things should be happening. Well, let's see. Assets on bank balance sheets are necessarily going to begin to become stressed. So yes, this system probably should be part of some sort of stress testing and modeling system for banks, but anyway, we'll come to that. But this is a dynamic system. It isn't static. It isn't price driven, and it isn't static. So what I mean by that is when a central bank says something like it'll threaten to spike the punch bowl, or it will overtly spike the punch bowl by lowering interest rates or by launching something like QE or other things that the ECB or the BOJ or the PBOC have done, when they do these things, it has an impact. Okay, and when the Fed threatens to do something or does something, it has an impact on global asset prices. It also has an impact on the input parameters to the mini Greedometer. So let's see. We all know that Fannie and Freddie were bailed out. We all know that AIG was bailed out and a couple of car companies. Also, when Lehman blew up, it was a rather busy time in September and October of 2008. Well, that by virtue of the Fed bailing these institutions out, had they not done it, this drop that happened in the SPIX afterwards here down to 800, pretty much with some certainty we would have seen the mini Greedometer hit the baseline again, probably somewhere around here-ish in time. And 800, probably we would have seen the SPIX drop when this happened, probably would have dropped to at least dropped to the 800s, maybe the 700s, and then another rally back to the top line. But we did see this bailout happen, so there's a certain amount of happiness. But it wasn't enough. Things rolled over, and ultimately the SPIX would drop, as we can see, to the 800s here. Which now you're going to look at this and you're going to say, "Hey, what's up with that?" Well, why isn't this point way down here saying this is a major inflection point? And the reason why that is because this is the week that the Fed launched QE1. All right, in when was it? November, I think, of 2008. Had the Fed not done that, we would have seen the SPIX plummet considerably lower that week and the week after, probably guaranteed the 700s and almost certainly the 600s at that point in time, a week or two afterwards. And that we would have seen the mini Greedometer values plummet for a week or two down to, yep, that baseline. Why? Because that's why. Okay? We would have seen the baseline seen around here-ish a week or two after this with the SPIX, probably the 600s. Go climb back up and drop again even further. Yeah, sorry to say that. That's what would have happened. But that was pretty brutal. And to be honest, Bernanke admitted years after the fact that at this point in time, the large U.S. banks were insolvent. So he had to take an action to stop things from getting worse. And so good for him, he did. How that is picked up by the mini Greedometers, then the mini Greedometer sequences, what happens is this, you warp the sequence flatter. What that means is, see this baseline? Imagine keeping that same point here, birth point. Now basically grab an endpoint and rotate that line flatter. Same thing with the top line, grab it and rotate it flatter, okay? So that's why this blue arrow is here. It's representing this line. If you extended it, we'll go right back to here. So this is a slower crash, but it's still continuing. So this is my projected new baseline, and this is my projected new top line. So we rotate that back up, We get a little bit of yumminess and happiness. The Fed threatens again to dramatically enlarge QE1 here. That's what caused this warping to go up along with that. And we spend some time along the top line, but ultimately it's not enough yumminess. So the market calls the bluff of the Fed, forces its hand here. But, and this is very key, this is very important. This is something that a lot of people don't pay attention to. You see this drop again here, and you say, this is when the SPIX dropped intraday 666, right? Very famous number, and that's the bottom of the crash, and things got happy afterwards. Well, the Fed stopped that crash a couple of weeks later, but that week was the same week that the FASB, the organization that comes up with accounting standards for the banking system here in the U.S., that organization was threatened by the Congress. That they were threatened with irrelevancy by the U.S. Congress. And the Congress wanted them to change the FASB to change accounting rules for banks so that they wouldn't have to value the assets on their balance sheet at mark to market. They would be able to value the toxic, well, and otherwise assets on their balance sheet at mark to model. Instantly, that made the U.S. banks appear solvent and bought time, and that was key. So that's what stopped that crash. And you might say, well, 666 and it started at 1500, it was a 57% drop in 17 months. It burned itself. It did not burn itself out. It was categorically stopped by the Fed and by this action by the FASB. Okay, had it not, yes, the baseline would have been seen probably a week or two later, and you know what? That 666 would have been nothing. We would have guaranteed seeing the SPIX drop to at least the 400s and very likely the 300s about a week or two later. Why? That's why, because we would have seen the baseline here. Okay, almost at this is what, April of 2018. I've got almost 20 years of data at this point. We are in the 12th Greedometer and many Greedometer sequence I've seen this 11 previous times. And there's just so much data backing this up that this is just how it works. So this is how the mini Greedometer works. It's a dynamic system. It is impacted by actions and threats of actions by the Fed and other central banks. And this is its application to the famous crash of 2007 to 2009. Hope you find this interesting and helpful.